I like to look at it kind of like a bucket, right? So if I've got 10 pieces of equipment that could run 24/7, now I'm not implying every plant should run 24/7, but if I have a piece of equipment and it can run 24/7, how much of that do I use? What are the leaks in the bucket? I took too long to change over the tool. I was down and I didn't get it back up and running. I didn't have an operator. I didn't have material. So there's all these leaks in the bucket. We have to problem solve the leaks in the bucket. And if we're using our equipment, like I sit on several board of directors. If I'm if they're talking about buying a new piece of equipment, I dive into how well do I use it today? Can I do better? Right now, I'm not implying we'll ever be at 100% in any of our equipment, but are we at 30 or are we at 85?
Welcome to the Cashflow Chronicles Open Forum. I'm Matt Allison, a commercial insurance advisor helping businesses protect their cash flow by managing risk and putting the right protections in place.
And I'm Brad Metzger, a commercial lender specializing in finance solutions, from lines of credit and term loans to real estate mortgages. I'm here to help businesses grow and stay flexible.
This podcast is a community-driven conversation for CFOs, finance leaders, and business owners who want real insight into cash flow, credit, and financial resilience.
We keep it practical, collaborative, and to the point.
Powerful finance conversations in under 40 minutes, built for busy professionals. This is the Cashflow Chronicles Open Forum.
So today we're joined by Laurie Harbour, a partner over at Wipfli. She has been a leading voice in the manufacturing and automotive industries. Laurie has spent her career helping companies navigate disruption, improve performance, and stay competitive. In this episode, we talk about the current state of manufacturing, how AI is reshaping the industry, and how businesses can handle unexpected challenges like tariffs and rising costs. Let's get into it.
I have a bit of a star here today with Laurie Harbour. Laurie, how's it going today?
Excellent. Thank you for having me.
So, quick question for you. What is the most exciting thing going on within your business at the moment, given all that's going on here at the business climate we're working with?
Wow, that's an interesting question. There's a lot of really cool stuff going on. A lot of interest in AI. There's no doubt. As I look at manufacturing, I have heard more requests for AI in the last 6 months than probably in the last 3 to 5 years. People really trying to understand it. What does it mean? And then, of course, that leads to lots of other things, right? So cybersecurity and managing kind of how we do the things we do within our business. But, some excitement about what the year may look like and hopefully some turn in the economy. That's what a lot of people are hoping for. Of course, the latest tariff decisions have impacted that, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But a lot of cool stuff. There's a lot of good new programs coming and some light at the end of the tunnel, I think, for some of these companies.
Yeah, I think we look at the way it's been sitting here with tariffs and where everyone's kind of a holding pattern, like, what do we do here? We don't know. And hopefully at this point, we're able to finally make some traction with investments and things along those lines. So overall, with the state of Michigan manufacturing, how would you view that on a broad scale standpoint, where we're at right now versus where we can be by the end of the year? If you were to look at some telltale signs of some of the challenges that's going on in the marketplace and where there are opportunities.
Yeah, of course, Michigan's the heart of manufacturing from my perspective, my home. So I'm very passionate about Michigan manufacturing. There's a lot of very mixed signs, I would say. A couple weeks ago, I was probably a little more positive about a positive turn on volumes picking up again. I think that the latest tariff decisions, although initially when the Supreme Court decision was made, a lot of people were quite positive because tariffs were going to be removed in some cases. And then within hours, President Trump, put in a new tariff with Section 122. So it just is creating an additional amount of uncertainty. Right. And so that may potentially pause some of the manufacturers in releasing new programs or, kind of in this wait and see mode. At the same time, we're also renegotiating USMCA, which has to be completed by July 1st. So I do believe that the actual market in terms of demand is on its path to grow in this year. I was hoping to see some growth in that. Not a stellar year over 25, but some potential growth opportunity as inventories are low and new programs come out. But, the tariff situation just creates uncertainty that then makes people kind of go into paralysis. So, I think we're resilient. And I think, I've been to a lot of Michigan manufacturers lately, and I'm seeing some really positive, upbeat companies, volumes growing, new programs. It's just in pockets. It depends on the industry that you're in. But there is a ton of opportunity as we continue to pull out of some of this and move through, navigate some of these tariffs and get new programs launched.
I think one of the things that within the manufacturing sector is diversification. It's much easier said than done. I think we had talked about that when we first were at the Tooling Manufacturing Technology Association, as far as like how can you diversify your customer base. Obviously here in Michigan, the auto city, what are some recommendations you have for individuals that either need to shift or are considering shifting to diversify their customer base?
Yeah, it's really important to think consistently about diversification, but I would bucket it in a couple different ways. And what I mean by that is there's market diversification. So I'm in auto. I want to, where can I expand into other, what I call adjacent markets? In other words, a lot of people come to me and say, "Hey, I'm in auto. I want to go to medical." I don't really call medical an adjacency to automotive, but heavy truck or aerospace and defense and things of that nature, those kind of are a little more adjacent to the market. But there's also within the market I'm in, there's product and commodity diversification. So, I have a lot of automotive clients who sit in Detroit and who make 4 or 5 core product lines. But what else could they make in automotive, right? So let's say I'm a molder or a stamper, or I make tools for the automotive industry. If I'm very good at certain commodities, what other adjacent commodities could I make? So a lot of times we kind of get stuck in our consistent customer base, which makes those 4 or 5 commodities. So we have to start thinking about how do we expand outside of that? So, probably the most opportunity I see for manufacturers today is to really dig into what I call sales process. So, we're working with a lot of clients on kind of reinventing their sales look. We get used to what we've been selling for a really long time. We get used to the same people we call upon. And frankly, our salespeople get comfortable. And so, if we can challenge our salespeople to think outside of maybe some of the box we've been sitting in, and think about what other things in automotive can we do? Because if you're a good automotive supplier, you've got the certifications, the capabilities. Now I just got to go hunt for some new customers, and maybe it's in a different commodity. And then if I really want, if I'm, sitting in Michigan, in Southeast Michigan or Western Michigan, wherever you're sitting, there's a tremendous amount of opportunity outside of automotive, right? We've got a lot of medical on the west side of Michigan that we can dive into. We have a lot of aerospace and defense, Macomb County and several of the areas within that. There's opportunities to be able to expand into some of those areas. Heavy truck and others, a lot of technical centers and headquarters of companies that may not necessarily manufacture here, but manufacture in the South or, in other areas of the Midwest. It really is about challenging our salespeople to think differently, build a strategic plan that allows us to kind of think outside of the box we're in. And then we got to go hunt. I mean, it's, the days of selling when people just came to you are gone. We got to really go and hunt for, go to trade shows, go to visit customers, make that list of people that we should be calling upon to be able to expand. Diversification is really a very important thing. And a lot of people get nervous getting out of automotive. And there's a whole faction of people that are not in automotive who don't even want to be in automotive. Right. So there's opportunities to be able to capitalize in each of those areas.
Yeah, I think you just look at the margin compression going on post EV. What are some of your thoughts on that? Because realistically, there's a lot of struggling. Now, I wouldn't say struggling, just a lot of manufacturers where that margin continues to drive further down. They need to take action internally, is my assumption, just to right the ship. Would you say that's kind of a very loosely termed status of how do you fix some of the margin challenges?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely correct. I mean, the margin erosion has been occurring, the last several years since COVID, frankly. We had this, incredible boom in COVID of new products and demand of products. And then we got supply chain shortages. And by 23, we were starting to drop in terms of revenue. But at the same time, through COVID, we had increased costs considerably, right? So our wages tend to go up between 3 and 4% a year. So beyond a normal COLA kind of wage increase, we had to bring people up to a level that they were comfortable with. So wages have increased. Benefits, of course, continue to increase, which you guys could probably speak to more than I can, right? But as you look at every line item of an income statement these days, everything has then gone up due to inflation, right? Even down to paper supplies for your restrooms and food in your break rooms and things of that nature. So we're seeing about an average 8 to 12% increase due to inflation since pre-COVID. So if you looked at income statements from 2019 to today, and at the same time, revenues have softened. So now we're looking at softer top lines, higher COGS on our overall income statement, which is compressing that margin. We do actually see some troubled suppliers, right? We're seeing that again, some restructuring going on, banks getting a little bit uncomfortable. But the majority of companies, I would say, sort of hunkered down post-COVID and managed some things. And now what we're just looking at is sort of bleak margins, 2, 3, 4%. Nothing to sort of write home about, but we're resilient and we're surviving, right? So the challenge here is that these costs aren't going to go down, right? I mean, we're not going to drop wages. We're not going to see cost decrease. So we need to control the controllables, things that we can control. In other words, waste in our plant, rework in our plant. We've got to get more efficient and we have to grow the top line. So we can't cost cut ourselves to prosperity, but we do need to manage costs, which is, I mean, frankly, I love the name of your podcast because it is about cash. It's about cash flow, right? And how do we manage cash? Do we have too many people in the plant that we could maybe send home because we don't have production, full production today? Are we collecting our cash from our customers on an ongoing basis? How are we managing APAR? So being able to drive that, what I control in my business and my levels of efficiency is critical. And at the same time, we got to go get new sales. We got to grow the top line because most people are still down in terms of overall revenue.
So you kind of touched on a couple of points I was kind of going to target on, but if you have a small manufacturer and they're getting a lot of pressure from the OEM, with the tariffs and costs, they may not be able to pass those on. What options do they really have when it comes to being a small manufacturer trying to deal with that large OEM?
Yeah, it is a big challenge because we all know who has the leverage there, right? There's a couple things I think about. The first is a lot of times as a small manufacturer, we don't do a great job of building the business case, right? We go into a meeting and we say, look, we need a price increase. All of our costs have gone up, as opposed to coming in with the documented data that says, look, here's my cost from 2019. Here's my cost today. Here's what I pay, what I get paid for your parts, and here's where I'm struggling to make ends meet, right? So building the business case is important. A lot of times as small companies, we don't have time or we don't have the data. We've got to make sure we know our data. We got to build a data-driven request for an increase. I have a lot of customers, small or medium, I mean, $10 million companies who just say, I'm passing the tariff on, and if you don't like it, I won't make parts for you. Now, that's a tough stance to take, but it's also, I mean, what's the alternative if I have a 25% tariff, right? So those are important pieces of that. And then the other part of it is, again, managing what I can control in my business. The biggest piece of data that I collect on an ongoing basis with our team here at Wipfli is we ask people if their revenue is growing or shrinking. We ask them if their profits are growing or shrinking. And we ask what's happening with their labor. And right now, I can tell you that over 70% of the population, which is hundreds of companies we gather data from, their revenues are down or flat, their profits are down or flat, but 80+% of them are hiring for growth or holding on to labor. That is the controllables I'm talking about. If we are continuing to see reduced volumes and profits, we need to right size our labor. I'm not an advocate of getting rid of people. I'm much more of an advocate of go obtain more work. But I also can't run a business with a bunch of extra people that I was striving to get when things were really busy in 21 and 22. And now I'm holding on to them because I'm afraid I won't find labor again. We've got to evaluate our labor and keep the best of those people. And we've got to right size. If we don't have new sales coming in, we've got to right size that labor until we do have more sales. That's the biggest controllable in our plant, right? Beyond material, because we don't control material. The price of material is the price of material, right? So we have to be able to manage the things that we can control. It's not for the faint of heart by any means, but it's something we got to manage.
I think some of the good operators that I've seen, when they start to see a downturn, they're quick to react. I gotta heads. I gotta figure out either drive new sales or figure out, hey, we don't need these people. It's a hard decision to do, but realize that ongoing expense could be expensive and put you out either on a job or completely out of business, depending on how the trends go. You kind of talk about automation, and I think sometimes it's good to kind of keep people in place, but it may not be the right people. So if I bring in automation, I may need a coder to help stand up a robot. It's not the same skill. So yes, you may need a body, but it may not be the right person to do that.
That's exactly correct. And in fact, the best companies today are actually hiring what I'm going to call a utility player, higher skilled, higher paid person, but hiring fewer of them. So if I'm able to get a young person or, middle-aged person who has good technical skills, can solve problems and implement automation and can do multiple functions, that's that multitask person, I would be willing to pay more for that person and have fewer of them to let them be utility players and help us solve problems. So you're absolutely correct, Brad. I mean, that we have to make sure that we have the best people in the best, in the right seats on the bus. And when we do that and we give them the empowerment to make an impact, that's what we're seeing in those best companies. They're really hiring the best of breed and allowing them to solve problems, giving them the tools and the kit to make a difference.
My biggest concern with us doing that, not saying that's wrong, right? I think it's great. You're exactly right. It's cross-pollinating, cross-educating your team that way that you don't have it down. But if you have somebody that is so specialized that they're the only ones to do it because you had 5 people, now it's 1. You're so relying on that one person, and if they leave, you have to do whatever you can to keep them in place. I think it's important.
Yeah.
But that it's a risk.
It's absolutely a risk. There's no doubt. And you have to then take those people that are left and make sure they're cross-trained as well, right? But you're right. I mean, fewer is always going to be a risk, especially if we have more technology in the process. But automation is the largest growing thing in manufacturing today, right? And all kinds of difference. There's no one size fits all, right? I mean, there's hand automation, there's fully automated systems. It just depends on what is right for us. And being able to keep some of those folks around to teach and coach and train is critical. But you're right, succession planning, one of the biggest things that in small companies don't think about it, right? Having an extra person on for succession planning is expensive. So it's important though, because you're right, we lose people, we lose a lot of tribal knowledge.
Yeah, I think the talent gap too in manufacturing in general, just to build on that, younger generations who say, hey, you're a coder within the realm of manufacturing. So I feel like manufacturing has a stigma, which it shouldn't, because I think some of the high school kids I mentor, you say, hey, do you want to get into a machine shop? And you can focus on manufacturing. It's a great culture. Is that something you're seeing as well? Just as far as the younger generation is more intrigued by the coding aspect of manufacturing, not necessarily working on a floor.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. I've been battling this for over 35 years, but my generation was a generation where we pushed our children to go to college and we didn't push them into these manufacturing jobs. I had my own personal experience with that, pushing my son into school, and now he's a machinist because that was what he was best at, right? So, we need to understand and to continue to teach and educate our educators, our counselors, that in the state of Michigan, 1 out of 4 kids graduates from college. They go to college, but they're not graduating, and they're not always graduating in their degree program, right? Or getting a job, I should say, in their degree program. So, if we can teach parents and educators that these are very cool jobs, that it's not just programming, but it's on the floor programming, it's on the floor problem solving, developing these automation systems. But the reality is that some of, not all, but some of this next generation doesn't want to be in manufacturing. It's not cool, right? And think about all the differences in manufacturing, right? If I walk into a fully automated body shop, that's very different than walking into a really dirty forging or die casting facility, right? Like, where do I want to spend my time? And the talent gap also, the best companies are solving some of that by how they're working with that population. The next generation wants to have a voice. They want to solve problems and they're really smart. And instead of us discounting them, right? I hear a lot of manufacturers in Michigan and around the country say to me, well, these young kids, they don't want to work. I think that's unfair. I think they want to work. I think they want to be heard, right? So you got to find them and then you got to develop them and give them the place where they can be empowered to make that impact.
Yeah, I think that's a great point of view because how different generations work. And a past guest talking about how do you break this generational gap as far as we want a flat organization, but you still need the hierarchical variables to make decisions as well. So I think that's a very real challenge, not even in manufacturing, but in business in general too. I work 9 to 5. That's all I work. I'm like, well, I must be nice.
Right.
Work-life balance, like you make your own work-life balance. It's not like a straight up 8 to 5 and you're done. So overall, we kind of talked about cash being king within businesses. How has that changed pre-COVID, post-COVID, in your opinion, from a cash flow as far as strategies businesses are taking versus the structure of what's going on in the economy? Is there anything that you've seen as far as a macro perspective?
I mean, yes and no. I mean, the unfortunate thing for me when I go into companies is how large the percentages of companies who don't track cash. Remember, we have a lot of owner operators, people who didn't necessarily get financial training in their process. So, especially like, you and I talked about at the tooling event, right? I go to tool suppliers, you've got a tool maker who became a president of a company, and tracking cash is maybe not in their first mindset, yet that's the most important place because of the way they get paid. So and now, of course, I go to a lot of companies where, doing a 13-week cash flow is a normal course of business, not just when you're troubled, which is what we tell people. We should be running 13 cash flows as just a normal, good course of doing business, right? Know when our peaks and valleys are going to be, know how I manage that cash, know when I need to stretch things or not stretch things, right? But some of our educators in the past have taught people that they should look at different things as they're in finance. So I continually like to talk to people about what's happening from a cash flow basis. At the end of the day, cash is the king in what we do. I'm not seeing as much as I would like to see. And when you look at some of the troubled companies out there, that you'll find that that's the common denominator of where we tripped up, right? And didn't manage those aspects of business.
So on the aspect of cash, right? So if we have a small supplier that, let's say, has a new contract, but had been thinking about getting a new piece of equipment, what are the thoughts that they should be going through, thinking about, should I buy it, use the existing equipment, or maybe buy used, knowing that tariffs are on the horizon?
Yeah, that's a good question because most equipment today is tariffed. And the only reason that most equipment is tariffed is because unfortunately it's not made most equipment's not made in the US. Whether it's a CNC machine or a molding machine or a stamping press, most of them are made overseas, whether it's Germany or Switzerland or, China or wherever else, right? So we're seeing a lot of tariffs on equipment. So when you're talking about growing and you want to add equipment, this becomes the biggest challenge. I mean, I have one client who their price just doubled on a piece of machinery. It's insane. Right? So, as you're looking at managing that, the biggest thing I do when people tell me they want to buy a new piece of equipment is I want to understand what your current capacity is and your current utilization on your equipment. Because I will tell you that 8 out of 10 times, most people have more capacity than they ever thought they had. We don't run equipment right. We have too much downtime on our machines. We don't schedule them. We're running one shift because it's hard to find a second shift. So, I like to look at it kind of like a bucket, right? So if I've got 10 pieces of equipment that could run 24/7, now I'm not implying every plant should run 24/7, but if I have a piece of equipment and it can run 24/7, how much of that do I use? What are the leaks in the bucket? I took too long to change over the tool. I was down and I didn't get it back up and running. I didn't have an operator. I didn't have material. So there's all these leaks in the bucket. We have to problem solve the leaks in the bucket. And if we're using our equipment, like I sit on several board of directors. If I'm if they're talking about buying a new piece of equipment, I dive into how well do I use it today? Can I do better? Right now, I'm not implying we'll ever be at 100% in any of our equipment, but are we at 30 or are we at 85? And I'll tell you the average in our data set right now is 52% across about 700 companies. So in every plant I go to, I was in 3 plants last week. It's like every third machine was running. So, and then somebody says, I want to buy a new piece of equipment. So unless it's a size I don't have, a new project that needs a dedicated machine, then I'm going to have a harder time with my ROI. And again, we've got to run those ROI calculations. If I buy this today, what does this look like for us? Because again, the one thing I can't pass on to my customer is the tariff, right? I can try to roll that on a piece of equipment because I'm buying that piece of equipment for my plant that I may run other parts on. So now I may be able to run it into my overhead structure, but it's much more difficult to do that. So ROIs and understanding capacity utilization are the most important things you're looking at in new equipment.
How common do you see that within leaders in the manufacturing sector when you talk about the ROI justification? Are they pretty prepared for that on a generalization standpoint? Because clearly they're operators. I know there's some financial stewards within organizations, but if you had to put a percentage of individuals that have that plan prepared, what would you say?
th- I think people generally do a pretty good job with it. There's definitely, again, some smaller companies, less sophisticated. There are some owners that just like to buy a new piece of equipment on an ongoing basis, not necessarily from a replacement standpoint. And so, but I would say people do a pretty good job of understanding that ROI. They could do better, of course. And then some people have a different concept of debt and cash flow, right? So depending on your interest rate, your structure, how much you've got guaranteed at a personal level as an owner, right? When do I take on debt? Obviously interest rates have been higher in the last couple of years. So I will tell you that we probably don't do a great job as small and mid-sized manufacturers of negotiating well. And I'm not necessarily talking about price, but more like payment terms. I have clients today who are buying mold machines and they're negotiating not making a payment for 12 months. Remember, machine manufacturers are struggling too because of tariffs and because of the reduction of capital spend with all this uncertainty lately. So they're a little more willing to adjust payment terms if they can move a piece of equipment. So, it never hurts to ask, right? What kind of favorable payment terms will you give me on this new piece of equipment? And then maybe I don't finance it. I pay cash over time or, it just depends on everybody's situation, of course, is different.
I love to dig into the value of communication. If you're honest and upfront, like, hey, these are some of the variables I'm working through. It might be a little bit nerve wracking at times, but as long as you communicate effectively, hey, this is the challenge. I think you're familiar with tariffs. I want to buy this, but here's ways we can negotiate appropriately. Obviously, the results vary, but at least you're upfront about that. I think it's a value add. And Brad, have you seen that within your client base as well, from a manufacturing standpoint, from a cash?
Again, it goes back to, hey, I want to buy this piece of equipment. I really need it. I have a new contract, but as Laurie pointed out, can you use the existing stuff? But I think what I'm running into too is these small to medium sized companies are trying to grow, but they don't have that historical cash flow. But I have a contract, and sometimes banks kind of look at projections of, well, it's a projection, it's not actual.
Mm-hmm.
And when they try to add on a piece of equipment, it's cash flow can be tight on a historical basis looking backwards. So it's important for us to try to find, I'll say, programs that may be able to help them, that give banks comfort, but it doesn't overly extend them from a cash flow standpoint. Maybe it's stretching a term out an extra 5-10 years, whatever it may be, but it's backed by some supportive government program, whether it be SBA or some Michigan Economic Development Corporation but again, having a good lender that understands what programs are available that can help are important. But also it's important for the customer to understand what programs are out there too, because again, the bank may not know or may not be eligible for it. And it's good to find a partner to do that. But companies that are trying to grow, its cash flow is tight, but they need that piece of equipment to do that job. I think you're right. You have to ask, well, what's out there from terms? Maybe a bank isn't the best option to finance your piece of equipment. It may be, the captive to do it. So I think Laurie pointed that out pretty good, but it varies from customer to customers. The smaller ones I think are a little bit tougher, but the larger ones, they have the bandwidth. They have the balance sheet that they can, either fund it themselves with cash or upfront cost, more of an upfront.
That's an important point about not just cash, but the overall balance sheet, right? A lot of owner operators without the training run it from the P&L, and the balance sheet is really where it's at, right? And you've got to be able to manage that effectively.
Yeah, coming from the AR insurance background, it's so realistic. We want to grow sales. We got this $400,000 new sale every 60 days, for example. And obviously with AR insurance, it's still that unknown variable, but I'm like, your AR is only AR until it's paid. Because I've seen a lot of those scenarios where they sell to the manufacturer and let's say they're struggling financially, and whether they file or they restructure, you're out that $400,000 that you sold waiting on bankruptcy or something along those lines. That's more of a doom and gloom perspective. But at the same standpoint, if you're paid late, that affects your cash flow and your overall operational financial health. So overall, where do you see manufacturing 5 years from now versus where we are now? Because we talked about AI, automation, the staffing challenges. Realistically, you'd be a millionaire if you were to say, hey, this is what manufacturing looks like in 5 years. But what trends are you seeing? And what advice would you have for individuals in the sector?
Well, I think that I'm hopeful about 5 years from now. COVID created an adjustment in our economy that was unanticipated. And there's a lot of people who talk about a potential recession at the end of this decade. I don't know how deep that will be. I think we're going to start to, see some rebound of inventories being low and demand being increasing across the board. The important thing to keep in mind that the one trend that I see that I think affects manufacturing the most is that COVID created a further bifurcation of our economy around the rich got richer, and that middle class maybe didn't move as fast, right? They got wage increases and we had all of this inflation, but now we're sitting in a bit of a difficult spot in that the middle class of our economy makes well under $100,000 on average, right? And yet it's very expensive to own a house and buy a car and those types of things. So the people buying big durable goods, cars and airplanes, boats, and things that are RVs and stuff like that, those things that are very high priced, the rich are continuing to buy. That middle class can't afford those things, and even in some cases can't afford the used car market. So we're seeing there's a lot of data that shows that bifurcation getting bigger, right? So we will continue to demand products because a lot of the 6-figure plus incomes will buy big durable goods, but fewer of them because the middle class isn't buying, right? So I think we continue to see a high mix and a low volume type of a market. And that will keep demand, I don't want to say soft, but softer than certainly what we saw in 21 and 22 with the economy, right? I do think that AI will continue to make its place in manufacturing. It will be, it's being tested by a lot of companies today in pockets of areas, right? Like we do a lot of implementation of AI, but we tell people, let's start small. Let's start in this little space and in this area. So I think labor is going to continue to be a challenge to get people in, and you're going to see more automation and more technology as a result of that challenge. There's no doubt that the administration and policy will have an impact on that in the next 5 years, right? We don't know what will happen this November with the midterms, or what happens in 2 years with the election, because, and I say that not because I think the administration dictates everything, but because the chaos we have seen with tariffs may continue or may settle or may go away, right? We just don't know what the situation will be if we change in the administration. So I am hopeful that demand will begin to continue to increase at levels that are manageable. I don't think we are ever going to see the rise in demand that we saw in 21, which was COVID driven. But I do think that companies will see some shrinking of some companies that aren't the best and aren't managing cash well. But for the most part, I think that we'll see some resilience in returning to some normal levels of production. So I'm hopeful, but I do think that companies need to think about how they're structured in their business. Right size their business, watch cash, focus on resiliency, focus on the things you control and not the things you don't control.
I think that's well stated. How do you prepare for the future to handle the downturn if you're facing some cash flow challenges? It's like, hey, this is a short-term hold just so we can be positioned long-term. That's well stated. Final question for you. We weren't prepared for this, Laurie. What is your favorite restaurant in Michigan, Metro Detroit? If you had to pick one.
You're killing me. I don't go out that much in Michigan, man. I do a lot of boating, so I like any restaurant that I can pull my boat up to, which unfortunately I don't necessarily live on a lake that has a restaurant anymore, but I do like Zeff's on Lake St. Clair. I like the restaurants that, are up and down the channel there off of out in Harrison Township. So whenever I'm over boating, that's usually what I enjoy the most, sitting outside, enjoying a drink, having some good food.
I think that's the great thing about Michigan. People think it's cold all the time, but our summers are unmatched. And I think that's what people don't, unless you're a snowbird like you, Laurie.
Yeah, I do like both places.
I think that's all we have at the moment. Really, really appreciate your time. Reach out to Laurie. She has some amazing insights, one of the most impressive presentations I've seen her put together at that event we previously talked about. So again, thank you so much, Laurie.
Thank you. I appreciate being on. Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
Yep. Thank you.
Take care.
Hey, you've made it all the way to the end. Thanks for that. Make sure you subscribe to the Cashflow Chronicles Open Forum newsletter, drop us a like, and follow us on LinkedIn and YouTube.